The village by the sea was small, but it lived in harmony with the tides. The air smelled of salt and wild rosemary, carried on the wind that drifted through narrow cobblestone streets. At dusk, when the horizon softened into shades of lavender and rose, the people of the village would light their lamps and settle into quiet evening routines. But the most beloved light of all came from Elara, the lantern maker. Elara lived in a little house with whitewashed walls and a garden that sloped toward the shore. Every lantern she made was different and painted with flowers, others carved with stars, and a few that seemed to glow brighter than the rest, as though they carried a secret of their own. Each evening, she would light them and hang them on doors, windows, and fences, so the village seemed to bloom with light even after the sun had gone. One evening, while setting a lantern at the edge of the beach, she noticed a man sitting on a driftwood log, gazing at the horizon. His clothes, though neat, bore the wear of many journeys: a faded navy coat, boots scuffed by salt, and hair tousled by long hours in the wind. A sailor, she thought. They often came and went, staying only long enough for supplies or repairs, before vanishing again into the waves. The man noticed her too, and gave a polite nod. "You make these lanterns?" he asked, gesturing to the warm globe she set upon the sand. "I do," Elara said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "They keep the darkness gentler." The sailor's lips curved into a faint smile. "A kind thought. I've crossed oceans where the nights feel endless, and I would have given anything for even one of these lights." Something in his tone made her pause. Not just weariness, but longing. She studied him for a moment longer before answering softly, "Then perhaps you'll walk with me tomorrow. You can help carry the light." The sailor hesitated, as if unused to invitations. Then he nodded once. "My name is Arin." "Elara," she replied. The waves hissed at the shore as though marking the moment, and above them the first lanterns of the night swayed gently in the sea breeze. The next morning, Elara rose early. Sunlight spilled through her windows in soft gold, warming the wooden beams of her workshop. Lanterns in various stages of completion lined the shelves. Some were delicate glass globes, others sturdy frames of bamboo and paper. She enjoyed the quiet hours before the village woke, when she could hear the seabirds calling and the steady hush of the tide. That morning, though, she found her thoughts wandering to the sailor on the beach. She told herself it was only curiosity strangers often passed through the village, but rarely did one pause to notice the lanterns or speak of them with such sincerity. Still, she tied back her hair a little more neatly, and when she placed her basket of lanterns by the door, she found herself hoping he would return. By late afternoon, as the sky shifted toward evening, she carried the basket toward the shoreline. Arin was already there, seated on the same driftwood log, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where the sea melted into pale blue. He rose when he saw her, brushing sand from his coat. "You came back," Elara said, a little surprised at the warmth in her own voice. "A promise is a promise," he replied simply. She handed him a lantern, its paper sides painted with swirls of orange and red. "This one is meant for the fisherman's cottage," she explained. "The sea can be unforgiving, but I like to think this flame reminds them of safety." Arin turned a lantern in his hands, studying it as though it were more than a simple object. "Do you give each one a meaning?" "Yes," she said, smiling faintly. "Every lantern carries a wish. Some for protection, some for joy, some for love." He glanced at her, and though the look was brief, it lingered in her thoughts long after. They walked together through the village, placing lanterns in windows and on fences. Children peeked from doorways, whispering curiously about the tall stranger with the sea-coloured eyes. Elara found herself laughing more than usual, surprised at how easily Arin joined in, telling stories of faraway ports and strange markets where spices filled the air. His voice carried a calm rhythm, like waves breaking on shore. When they reached the last house, Elara paused. "Thank you for helping." Arin set the final lantern down gently. "It was different from what I'm used to. The sea is all motion, all change. But this," he gestured to the glowing villagey, "feels steady, alive in a quieter way." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of lantern flames and the distant call of gulls. "Stay a little longer," Elara said without thinking. And so, they stood together beneath the growing night, the lanterns around them swaying like stars drawn down to earth. The days slipped into a rhythm neither of them had expected. Arin remained in the village while his ship underwent repairs at the harbour, and each evening he joined Elara on her rounds. What began as a polite gesture soon became something they both looked forward to. The lanterns felt brighter with two sets of hands carrying them, and the silence of the walk was filled with stories and laughter. One evening, as they made their way down a narrow lane lined with rosemary bushes, Arin asked, "Do you never wish to see the world beyond these shores?" Elara thought for a moment, her fingers brushing the leaves that released a faint, sharp scent. "I thought of it," she admitted. "But there's something about staying. People here count on the lanterns. They trust them to be lit. And I love watching how their faces soften when the light reaches them." Arin smiled faintly. "You carry the world to them, then. Each flame is like a journey they don't have to take." She glanced at him, touched by the way he understood. "And you? Have you never wished to stay somewhere?" He hesitated. "I've anchored in many harbours, but I always felt the pull of the sea again. It's easier not to grow attached when you know the tide will carry you away." His gaze drifted to the lantern in his hand, the glow reflected in his eyes. "But here it feels different. Like the tide could lose its hold." Elara's heart quickened at his words, though she said nothing. Instead, she placed the lantern on a stone wall, letting the flame spread its warmth across the shadows. Later, when their rounds were done, they sat on the driftwood log at the edge of the beach. The sea stretched out before them, dark and restless, while the village behind them glowed with gentle light. "Tell me a story from your travels," Elara said softly. Arin leaned back, folding his arms behind him. "In the southern seas, there is an island where the sand shines like silver beneath the moon. The people there believe that each grain holds the memory of a star that fell into the water. When I stood there at night, it felt as though I was walking across the sky." Elara closed her eyes, picturing it. "That sounds beautiful." "It was," he admitted, "but it feels pale compared to this." She turned to him, surprised. "Compared to what?" He gestured to the lanterns glowing across the shoreline, their reflections trembling on the tide. "To this village. To you." For a long time, neither spoke. The waves whispered secrets of their feet, and the lanterns swayed gently in the night breeze, as though listening. The village soon grew used to seeing Arin at Elara's side. Children who once whispered shyly now ran to greet him, tugging at his sleeves to ask about his journeys. He would crouch down, patient and smiling, and describe markets filled with spices, parrots with feathers like fire, and storms that painted the sky violet. Elara often listened from nearby, amused by how easily he adapted to this new role, no longer just a sailor, but part of their quiet rhythm. One afternoon, before their evening walk, Arin found Elara in her workshop. She was bent over a wooden frame, smoothing paper across its surface. Sunlight streamed through the open window, casting patterns of light and shadow on the floor. "You work as though the lanterns are alive," Arin said, leaning against the doorway. They are, in a way, she replied, not looking up. Each one carries a breath of me. That's why I never make them in haste. He stepped closer, studying the rows of half-finished lanterns. You give so much of yourself away. Don't you ever wonder what's left for you? Her hands paused. Slowly, she looked up at him. Perhaps that's why I keep making more. As long as the flames burn, I feel whole. There was a weight to her words that stirred something in him. Without meaning to, he reached the one of the lantenza, small one painted with blue waves. And this one? She smiled faintly. That one is for safe return. The air between them lingered, filled with unspoken thoughts. Then Elara returned to her work, though her cheeks carried a quiet flush. That evening, they walked farther than usual, past the last row of cottages to the cliff path that overlooked the sea. The wind was stronger here, tossing Elara's hair about her face. Arin instinctively reached to steady the lantern she carried, their hands brushing for just an instant. Do you miss it? Elara asked, nodding toward the horizon. The open water? Arin's eyes traced the waves, but his answer came slowly. It's strange. I've spent most of my life longing for the sea when I was on land, and longing for land when I was at sea. But here... His gaze shifted to her. Here I find myself wishing only that time would slow. The words caught in the air, fragile and honest. Elara's heart fluttered, and for once she didn't try to hide it. She only lowered the lantern to the grass, letting its light pool at their feet. Together they stood at the cliff's edge, silent except for the steady breath of the ocean. Above them, the first stars appeared, faint but certain, like promises waiting to be spoken. The following days seemed touched by a quiet magic. Whenever Elara walked through the marketplace, she would catch glimpses of Arin speaking with the blacksmith, or carrying bundles for the baker, as though he had lived there all his life. The villagers warmed to him quickly, though some teased Elara gently when they noticed how often the two walked together at dusk. She would smile and brush it aside, but her heart always beat faster at the thought. One evening, the air was unusually calm. The sea lay like a mirror, and even the gulls were hushed as though the world itself leaned in to listen. Elara and Arin set their lanterns along the fishing pier, their reflections trembling on the still water. Tell me, Arin said, his voice low, what is it you wish for when you light these? Elara tilted her head, thinking. It changes. Sometimes I wish for strength, sometimes for kindness. Sometimes, if I'm honest, I wish for someone to see the light and carry it with them. And do you believe wishes come true? He asked. She met his gaze, the lantern light painting gold across his face. Only if they're meant to. The silence that followed felt heavy with possibility. Arin set down the lantern he held and leaned against the railing of the pier. When I was young, I thought the sea would be everything I needed. Freedom, adventure, discovery. But the more I travelled, the more I realised freedom means little if you have no one to share it with. Elara's breath caught. And now? Now, he said, looking at her fully. I wonder if I've been searching not for a place, but for a person. Her fingers tightened around the lantern she carried. For a heartbeat, she wanted to answer, to say she felt the same pull whenever she looked at him. But her voice softened instead. Perhaps the sea brought you here for a reason. Arin smiled, a small, almost disbelieving smile. Perhaps. They finished their walk in companionable quiet, yet both felt the air charged, as though every lantern burned brighter that night. When they returned to the beach, they lingered longer than usual, neither wanting to part. Finally, as the lantern swayed in the breeze, Elara whispered, "Stay a little longer." And he did. That night, when the village finally slept, Arin and Elara remained by the shore. The moon had risen high, spilling a silver path across the water. They sat close enough to hear the others breathing, their words soft so as not to disturb the quiet. "Tell me about your family," Elara asked gently. Arin hesitated. He was not a man accustomed to sharing. "My father was a sailor too. He believed the sea would make a man strong, so he set me on a ship before I was old enough to decide for myself. My mother, she wrote me letters. I carried them for years, but the salt air wore. Then thin." Elara listened, her gaze on the horizon. "It must have been lonely." "It was," he admitted. But there were moments standing on a deck at dawn, seeing the sun spill over waves untouched by land. It felt like I was the first man alive. His voice softened. And yet none of it felt like home. She placed her hand lightly on the driftwood between them, not quite touching his. "Home isn't always where you're from. Sometimes it's where you're meant to arrive." Arin turned his head to her, something unspoken lingering in his eyes. For a moment, the distance between them felt thinner than air. Elara, sensing the weight of it, smiled instead, gentle and disarming. "And you? Will you always chase horizons?" He exhaled slowly. "I don't know anymore." The lanterns they had left behind flickered faintly in the distance, like stars that had fallen to earth, each carrying a wish. The following morning, Elara awoke to a knock at her door. When she opened it, Arin stood there, holding a basket of freshly baked bread from the baker's wife. "She insisted I bring this," he said, a little sheepish. Elara laughed. "She must have known you'd eat half of it on the way." Arin raised a brow. "I'll have you know, I resisted temptation." They shared the bread in her garden, beneath the shade of rosemary and lavender. Bees hummed lazily around them, and the salty wind from the sea rustled the herbs. Arin told her more stories about storms that bent masts like twigs, about nights when the stars guided him through fog. Elara listened with quiet fascination, her fingers absent-mindedly weaving a crown of rosemary sprigs. At last she placed it on his head. "There. Now you look less like a sailor and more like one of our villagers." He touched the crown lightly, his smile slow and genuine. "It feels right." That evening, as they walked through the village with their lanterns, a group of children followed them, giggling. One little girl tugged on Elara's sleeve and whispered loudly, "Is he your husband?" Elara flushed scarlet, nearly dropping her lantern. Arin chuckled, crouching down to meet the child's eyes. "Not yet," he said playfully, "but perhaps one day she'll let me carry lanterns for her forever." The children squealed with delight and ran off, leaving Elara wide-eyed. She swatted at his arm. "You shouldn't tease." "I wasn't teasing," Arin said softly, his gaze steady. The words hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Elara's heart thudded in her chest as they continued their walk, the glow of the lanterns reflecting her flushed cheeks. One night, the wind grew wild, and the sea roared louder than usual. Elara worried the lanterns would be snuffed out, but Arin insisted on helping her place them anyway. Rain misted their faces, the storm tossing their hair. At one house, Elara's hands trembled as she tried to light a wick, the flame flickering out. Arin cupped his hands around hers, shielding the flame with his body. Together, the lantern lit, steady and bright despite the storm. When she looked up at him, their faces were only inches apart, rain dripping from his lashes. For a heartbeat, the world hushed around them, the lantern burning between their hands. "Elara," he whispered, as though her name itself were a promise. But before either could say more, thunder cracked, and the spell broke. They hurried on, yet both carried the warmth of that moment long after the storm passed. The next morning, the village buzzed with talk of the storm, but everyone agreed the lanterns had held steady through the night. Many thanked Elara, and she felt their gratitude, like a soft weight in her chest. Later, she found Arin repairing a fishing net with one of the older men by the shore. He worked with surprising skill, his hands steady as though he'd done it for years. When he noticed Elara watching, he excused himself and walked over. "You seem to be fitting in well," she teased. "And trying," he replied. Then, more seriously, "I don't want to be just a visitor here." The words struck deep. Elara's heart fluttered with both hope and fear, for she knew the ship's repairs would soon be finished. She wanted to believe he would stay, but sailors were bound to the sea, just as she was bound to her lanterns. Still, when he reached for her hand briefly, rough fingers brushing hers, she let him. And in that fleeting contact, she allowed herself to imagine a future where neither of them had to drift away. The days lengthened into a kind of quiet season, where time felt slower. Arin often visited Elara's workshop in the afternoons, lending his hands to small tasks. He wasn't skilled with delicate paper or paint, but he had patience, and he enjoyed watching the way she moved with focus, her hands steady, her brow furrowed. Sometimes he teased her to make her smile, and sometimes he simply listened to the scratch of her brush against paper, as if it were music. One afternoon, while she painted tiny stars across a lantern's surface, he asked, "What do you dream of, when the lanterns are done and the night grows quiet?" She paused, the brush hovering in midair. "I dream of skies filled with them lanterns rising together, a river of light above us, so many that they rival the stars." Arin's gaze lingered on her. "Then one day, we'll do it. We'll light the sky for you." Her heart caught at the certainty in his voice, but she only smiled faintly and dipped her brush again. "Careful, sailor. Promises are heavy things." That evening, they carried their lanterns as usual. The path wound along the shore where driftwood and shells lay scattered. Arin stooped to pick up a smooth piece of sea glass, holding it out to her. "For you," he said. She turned it in her palm, the green shard catching the lantern's glow. "It's worn by the sea, softened by time. Like me," he teased. She laughed, tucking the glass into her pocket. "No, you're stronger than this." As they walked on, the waves brushed their ankles, the tide unusually high. Elara lifted her skirt to keep it from the water, and Arin instinctively steadied her with a hand at her elbow. Their laughter mingled with the sound of the sea, until the night felt stitched together by joy. When they reached the final house, Arin lingered, his hand brushing hers again. "Sometimes I wonder if I spent my whole life just to find this village," he murmured. Elara's reply was quiet but steady. "Or perhaps just to find me." The ship in the harbour was nearly mended. Arin walked past it each day, feeling the familiar tug of duty. The crew called to him, reminding him of the journeys ahead, the promises of distant horizons. Yet his feet always carried him back to Elara, to her lanterns, to the rhythm of a village that had begun to feel like a heartbeat. One evening, as they set lanterns on the pier, Elara asked softly, "When the ship sails again, will you go with it?" The question was simple, but it lodged in his chest. He stared at the glowing lanterns reflected on the water, their fragile flames trembling. "I don't know," he admitted. She nodded, not pressing further, though her smile dimmed. "Then let's make tonight bright, whatever comes after." They stood together, watching the lanterns drift in the breeze, both holding back the words that weighed heavy on their hearts. That week, the villagers held a small festivala tradition to welcome the turn of the season. The square filled with music, laughter, and the scent of roasted chestnuts. Children ran with ribbons, and elders told stories of the sea. Elara wore a dress of pale blue, her hair braided with tiny sprigs of rosemary. When Arin saw her, his breath caught. She was luminous in the lantern light, like one of her own creations come to life. "Dance with me," he said, offering his hand. She hesitated, unused to such boldness, but then placed her hand in his. They moved slowly, not caring for the rhythm of the musicians, only for the closeness between them. The world blurred around them, the square glowing with hundreds of lanterns strung high above. For a moment, it felt as if they were the only two in the world, two souls circling gently, bound by light. After the festival, they walked together through the quiet streets, their steps unhurried. Arin carried his coat over one shoulder, the night air cool against his skin. Elara clutched a small lantern she had saved from the celebration, its flame steady. "I've danced in many ports," Arin confessed, "but tonight felt different. It felt like home." Elara smiled softly. "Home isn't a place, Arin. It's a belonging. If you feel it here, then perhaps you found it." He stopped, turning to her, the lantern light casting their shadows across the cobblestones. "Then let me belong here with you." The words were spoken low, almost trembling with sincerity. Elara's breath caught, but she didn't look away. Her answer was not spoken, but in the way her hand slipped into his, fingers interlacing as though they had always belonged. And in the quiet of the village night, their silence was more binding than any vow. The mornings began to feel different after that night. Elara noticed it first how. The air seemed brighter, how her footsteps felt lighter as she went to the market or the shore. She told herself it was the season's change, but deep down she knew it was something else. Something about the sailor who lingered longer and longer by her side. One afternoon, Arin surprised her by bringing wood from the shipyard. "I thought your workshop could use sturdier shelves," he said, setting the planks down. Elara blinked. "You're building for me now?" "Why not?" He grinned. "If I'm to belong here, I should leave something standing behind me." They spent the afternoon hammering and sawing, though Arin's hands were more suited to ropes and sails than carpentry. The shells leaned slightly when they finished, but Elara laughed as she placed lanterns upon them. "Perfect," she declared. "Crooked things carry the most charm." Arin watched her laughter, and for a fleeting moment he thought he could live in this crooked little workshop forever. As twilight came, they carried lanterns along the path to the cliffs again. The sea stretched vast and endless, the horizon tinged with violet. Arin leaned against the rocks, his voice low. "Sometimes I wonder what my crew thinks of me. I was always the one urging them forward, never the one to linger. Now I linger every day." Elara set a lantern on a flat stone, the flame bending in the breeze. "Perhaps they see you differently now. Not weaker, but stronger. It takes courage to stop running." Her words sank into him, deeper than the tide. He studied her face, lit by the flickering glow. "Do you truly believe that?" She nodded. "I do." For a while, they simply stood in silence, the sea breathing below them. It was not a silence of emptiness, but one filled with the warmth of unspoken truths. The following week, a storm unlike any the village had seen in years swept in. The wind howled through the streets, shutters rattling, waves crashing against the harbour walls. Elara ran through the rain, clutching her lanterns, determined to keep them lit despite the storm's fury. Arin found her struggling with one near the pier, her cloak whipped by the wind. "Elara," he shouted, pulling her back from the water's edge. "I can't let them go dark," she cried. "The people need them." Together they shielded each flame, using their bodies as barriers against the storm. By dawn, They were soaked, shivering, but every lantern still burned. As they collapsed on the driftwood log, exhausted, Elara leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her without hesitation. "You're braver than any sailor I've ever known," he murmured. Her eyes closed, and for the first time, she allowed herself to rest in his arms. The storm passed, leaving the village battered but intact. The people praised Elara for her devotion, but she insisted it was not her alone. "Arin kept the lights alive with me," she told them. The villagers looked at him with newfound respect, no longer a stranger but one of their own. Old men clapped his shoulder, children ran to him, and the baker's wife pressed extra loaves into his hands. That evening, as the village glowed once more, Arin stood beside Elara, watching the people laugh and gather. "I never thought I'd find a place that claimed me," he admitted softly. "But here with you, I feel as though I've been found." Elara turned to him, her heart trembling at the honesty in his voice. "And I feel less alone than I ever have." The lanterns above swayed gently, as though blessing the quiet vow between them. But even as days passed in peace, the repaired ship loomed in the harbour. The crew grew restless, preparing for departure. Arin could feel their eyes on him when he walked past, questions unspoken. Would he sail with them, as always? Or would he abandon the life he had known for something uncharted? That evening, as he and Elara placed their final lantern, he finally spoke of it. "The ship leaves soon." Her hands stilled. "I know. I don't want to go," he said, his voice rough. "But the sea has been my life. Part of me feels bound to it." Elara's chest ached, though she kept her gaze on the lantern's glow. "And part of you feels bound here?" "Yes," he whispered. The silence stretched, filled with the weight of choice. Neither spoke further, but both knew the moment was coming when they would no longer be able to walk only in light. The morning after their conversation, Arin awoke before dawn. The harbour lay still, the ship bobbing gently in the grey light. He walked along the pier, fingers trailing along the rough wood, lost in thought. Each plank seemed to whisper reminders of the life he might levand, the life he could choose to embrace. Elara found him there, lantern in hand, her hair damp from the morning mist. "You're thinking," she said softly, joining him at the edge. He sighed. "I'm thinking about what's right and what's mine. The sea has been my path for so long, and yet every time I see you, every time I watch the village glow, I wonder if I've been chasing the wrong horizon." She lifted the lantern higher, its flame trembling. "Horizon doesn't mean distance. Sometimes it's simply the place where your heart rests." Arin met her gaze. "And if I choose to stay, will you let me?" Her smile was small, quiet, but her eyes shone. "If you truly wish to be here, then yes. Always." Over the next days, the tension of departure hovered. Arin worked with the villagers, mending nets, repairing fences, helping wherever he could. He seemed less like a stranger and more like someone meant to belong. Yet every night, he and Elara lingered by the shore, lanterns between them, speaking softly about small things, flowers blooming along the cliff, waves curling just so, the smell of rain on sand. One night, as the lanterns swayed, Elara spoke first. "I imagine us lighting the sky together someday. Thousands of lanterns, rising into the stars." Arin's hand brushed hers as he held a small lantern. "I'd like that," he said simply. "I can't imagine doing it with anyone else." The words were steady, sure, but the shadow of the ship still tugged at him, reminding him of a world beyond the village. The villagers sensed the change in Arin. Conversations hushed when he passed, glances exchanged between friends and elders. No one questioned him. Yet everyone knew the man who had once drifted endlessly was now anchored by chasseur, by love. One afternoon, Arin took Elara to the cliff path. The wind tossed her hair around her face, and he tacked it back gently. "I've decided," he said, voice low. "I can't leave. Not now. Not ever." Elara's breath caught. "Arini." He took both her hands in his. "I've sailed across oceans, seen wonders beyond imagination, but none of it felt like home. I was always looking for something I couldn't name. And now I know it was you, and this village, and these lights." Tears pricked her eyes as she leaned closer. "I was afraid you'd leave, even after saying so much." "I won't," he promised. "Not without you." That evening, the villagers gathered along the pier for the seasonal lantern release. Hundreds of lanterns hung from ropes, their flames reflecting on the gentle waves. Arin and Elara worked side by side, checking wicks and adjusting frames, their fingers brushing often enough to make them both smile. When the first lanterns were released, they rose slowly, drifting together into the twilight sky. Elara's eyes glistened with reflected flames. "They're beautiful," she whispered. Arin put an arm around her shoulders. "Not as beautiful as this moment." The lanterns floated higher, merging with the stars, and for the first time, the village seemed to hold its breath in reverence. In that silence, neither feared the future, for they had chosen it together. As the night deepened, the wind quieted, and only the soft lapping of waves remained. Arin and Elara sat on their favourite driftwood log, watching the last lanterns drift skyward. "Do you ever miss the sea?" Elara asked softly. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But it's no longer calling me. The sea gave me the world, but it didn't give me a home. You did. You gave me light." She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of both him and the lantern's glow. "Then we can face anything," she murmured. They stayed there until dawn, holding hands, hearts steady, and the world around them seemed to hum softly in harmony. It was a night neither would forget, a promise etched in flame and tide. Days turned warmer, and the village thrummed with the gentle energy of summer. Arin and Elara's walks became longer, often venturing beyond the cliffs to paths few villagers travelled. They discovered hidden coves where shells lay in delicate patterns, and wildflowers grew thick against the wind. One afternoon, they found an abandoned rowboat pulled high onto the shore. "We could fix it," Arin suggested, a spark in his eyes. "Sail along the coastline, see what lies beyond the cliffs." Elara hesitated, brushing her fingers along the rough wood. "Would we leave the village?" "Only for a little while," he said softly. "I want to show you the world I've seen, but only with you." The thought stirred something daring inside her. Perhaps adventures could be shared, as long as home remained where the heart belonged. They spent the following days mending the boat. Arin guided Elara through knots and repairs, showing her how to patch holes and balance the hull. Their hands often brushed, lingering longer than necessary, and both laughed more than they had in weeks. One morning, as sunlight glinted off the water, Arin handed her a small, polished piece of driftwood. "A charm," he said. "For luck when we sail." Elara turned it over in her hand, noticing the tiny carved star. "You make everything feel safer," she murmured. "Not me," he said, smiling. "The star. It guides us." Her cheeks warmed, but she slipped the charm into her pocket. In the quiet, it felt like a symbol of trust, of partnership, of a future neither dared to speak aloud yet. The night before their first sail, the village gathered for another lantern release. Hundreds of lights flickered against the dark sky, and children ran between the piers laughing. Arin and Elara stood side by side, holding hands, their lanterns ready. "Promise me something," Elara said. "What?" "That no matter where the boat takes us, we always come back. To the village. To this." Arin squeezed her hand. "I promise. Always." As their lanterns floated upward, mingling with the stars, the village seemed to pulse with light, blessing them. And in that moment, the sea was not frightening it, was an invitation, a mirror of their shared courage. Their first sail was quiet at first, the boat moving slowly along the calm coast. Elara steadied the tiller as Arin adjusted the sails. The wind tugged gently, carrying them along a glittering path of moonlight on water. "You're a natural," Arin said, glancing at her. Elara laughed softly. "I have a good teacher." The night stretched peacefully, the only sounds waves against wood, and the occasional call of a distant gull. They spoke little, letting the rhythm of the boat and the lapping tide speak for them. And in that silence, their hearts aligned, steady and sure. As dawn broke, they reached a hidden cove, its sand white and untouched. They beached the boat and explored the shoreline, finding shells shaped like crescent moons and stones smoothed to perfection by years of waves. Sitting side by side on a driftwood log, they shared a quiet meal of bread and cheese. Arin watched the sun rise over the horizon and then looked at her. "I thought I knew the sea," he admitted. "But I never understood its beauty until now. Not the water itself, but the moments you share upon it." Elara rested her head on his shoulder, warmth spreading through her chest. "Then we can have many more," she whispered. And in the soft glow of dawn, the world felt endless, full of possibility, and theirs to explore together. Weeks passed, and the hidden cove became their secret refuge. Arin and Elara would row there whenever the tides allowed, leaving the village behind, the lanterns' only memories they carried in their hearts. Yet even in this secluded paradise, the tension of the outside world lingered. The repaired ship in the harbour, the calling of distant ports, reminders that the sea had not forgotten him. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the water gold, Arin paused. "Elara, if one day I must leave, I want you to know it's not because I want to be without you." Her hand stilled on the boat's edge. "And if that day comes, then I'll return," he promised. "Even the farthest horizon cannot sever what matters most." Elara nodded, but the ache of uncertainty lingered. The cove felt like a safe bubble, yet reality pressed beyond the waves, waiting. A sudden storm tested that safety. Clouds rolled in without warning, winds lashing the boat. Waves tossed them like toys, and the hidden cove transformed from a haven into a challenge. Arin and Elara worked together, shouting over the roar of the storm, each instinctive movement a silent affirmation of trust. "Elara, lower the sail," Arin called, grabbing her hands to steady her. Her heart pounded, fear mingling with exhilaration. I'm trying." They battled the wind and tide, finally finding the calm mouth of the cove. As the storm passed, they collapsed onto the sand, soaked, trembling, but alive. "I was terrified," Elara admitted, leaning into him. "So was I," he said. "But facing it together, it made all the difference." The villagers noticed the change when Arin returned. He spoke more openly now, laughing easily with the children, helping with repairs, always carrying a calm confidence that came from his bond with Elara. One afternoon, the baker's son ran to them with a question. "Will you two marry?" Elara flushed. her hand brushing Arin's. We haven't talked about it yet." Arin's gaze softened. "But we will," he said. "Soon." The simplicity of the answer made her chest swell. Not a grand declaration, but a promise of time, patience, and certainty. Autumn approached, and with it, a festival celebrating the harvest. The village was alive with lanterns, laughter, and the scent of roasted chestnuts. Elara prepared her most intricate lanterns yet, while Arin helped string hundreds along the pier. As the first lanterns rose, Arin leaned close. "Do you remember the first night we stood by the driftwood log?" Elara smiled, warmth spreading through her. "I remember. I thought the night would never end." "Neither did I," he said. "And now, I don't want any night to end with you by my side." The lanterns above swayed in the gentle breeze, each flame a testament to promises, shared time, and quiet love. After the festival, they walked along the cliffs, the night air crisp and fragrant. Arin stopped, pulling the small driftwood charm from his pocket. "For you," he said, pressing it into her hand. Elara held it tightly. "I carry it everywhere," she said softly. "Then carry me too," he whispered. "Not in a pocket, not in a charm, but in your heart." Her eyes glistened. "Always." For a long while, they stood together, watching the sea stretch endlessly below. The horizon promised adventures, challenges, and unknown paths, yet neither feared it. Together, they could face anything the world, the tide, the storms because they had chosen each other, and the lanterns above reminded them that light always finds a way to shine. Winter approached, bringing a chill that whispered across the village. Arin and Elara found themselves indoors more often, tending lanterns and preparing supplies for the long nights. Yet even the cold could not dampen the warmth that had grown between them. One afternoon, while repairing lantern frames by the fire, Arin watched Elara carefully. "You have a way of making even the smallest things feel important," he said. She looked up, a smile tugging at her lips. "Someone has to care for them, and someone has to care for me too." His eyes softened, and he reached for her hand, holding it over the glowing embers. "Then I will. Every day, every night, as long as I live." That evening, a thick fog rolled in from the sea. The village lanterns glimmered like tiny stars lost in mist, and Arin and Elara walked together along the pier, their hands intertwined. "The sea calls me sometimes," he said quietly, his breath visible in the cold. "But I'd never felt torn like this before." Elara squeezed his hand. "It doesn't matter where it calls. You've chosen here. You've chosen me." He nodded, resting his forehead lightly against hers. "And I will never regret it." The fog surrounded them, but in that cocoon of mist and quiet, the world felt still, and their hearts beat in perfect unison. One snowy morning, the village woke to a gentle covering of white. Lanterns glimmered like frozen fire along the streets, reflecting in the soft snow. Arin helped Elara carry lanterns for the villagers, laughing as they slipped on icy patches together. "You make everything feel like an adventure," she said, steadying him as he nearly lost his footing. "And you make every adventure feel like home," he replied, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. The day passed in warmth and laughter, the chill forgotten, replaced by the quiet certainty of belonging. As the first stars appeared, they returned to their favourite cliff. The sky was clear, a tapestry of infinite light. Arin brought a small box with him, his hands trembling slightly as he held it. "Elara," he said, voice low, "I've travelled far, seen countless horizons, but the only place I want to be is here with you." She looked at him, breath caught. He opened the box to reveal a simple ring, a tiny carved star on its band. "Will you stay with me always?" Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded, unable to speak. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and in that quiet moment, the world itself seemed to pause, as though the stars themselves were witnessing their promise. The village lanterns mirrored the stars above as they stood hand in hand, their hearts full. "We've found home," Elara whispered. "Yes," Arin replied, pulling her close. "Not just a place, but a life, together." For a long while, they simply stood, the sea stretching endlessly below, the night alive with soft light. In the gentle glow of the lanterns, nothing felt impossible. The tides, the winds, the distant horizons all were theirs to face together, bound by love, trust, and a light they had carried for so long. Spring returned to the village, carrying the scent of blossoming flowers and fresh sea air. Arin and Elara spent long mornings tending to the garden behind her workshop. Roses climbed along the trellis, and wild herbs scented the paths. Arin dug small holes for new plants, while Elara sowed seeds carefully. "You have a way of seeing the potential in everything," he said, brushing dirt from his hands. Elara smiled, handing him a watering can. "It's easier to see potential when someone you love tends it with you." They laughed softly, and the garden seemed to grow faster, nurtured not just by water and sun, but by the quiet devotion shared between them. One afternoon, they took the repaired boat back to the hidden cove. The water gleamed under the sun, reflecting 1,000 dancing lights. Elara held the tiller confidently, steering them past familiar rocks and hidden inlets. "You're becoming quite the sailor," Arin remarked, eyes glinting. "And you're becoming quite the craftsman," she teased. "Look at how perfectly you've repaired every plank." They laughed together, the boat rocking gently beneath them. Time seemed suspended, each moment a small eternity, filled with the kind of contentment that comes from shared purpose and mutual trust. At night, they would light lanterns along the pier together. Arin sometimes brought small gifts from his travels, trinkets or stones smoothed by distant seas, and Elara would weave them into the lantern's design. "Every light tells a story," she said one evening, adjusting a tiny star-shaped charm inside a lantern. Arin nodded, placing a hand over hers. "And every story has you in it now." The lantern floated into the night sky, mingling with the stars. Each release felt like a reaffirmation of their life together, a ritual but neither time nor distance could diminish. A quiet afternoon brought a surprise visit from the villagers. Children ran to greet them, shouting and laughing, while the elders brought food and news from the harbour. Arin and Elara welcomed everyone warmly, their home now fully intertwined with the life of the village. One of the children tugged on Arin's sleeve. "Will you tell us a story of the sea?" He smiled, lifting the child onto his lap. "I will," he said. "But tonight's story isn't about storms or waves, it's about a sailor who found his home and the person who made every horizon worth exploring." Elara laughed softly, leaning against him, her heart full. The story wasn't just for the children, it was their story too, lived and breathed every day. As the sun set over the cliffs, Arin and Elara walked hand in hand, lanterns swaying between them. The light reflected off the waves, creating a glittering path that seemed endless. "I can't imagine life without this," Elara murmured, glancing at him. "Nor I," Arin replied, tightening his grip on her hand. "Everything I once sought at sea, I found here with you." They paused at the edge of the cliff, watching the horizon turn gold and purple. The world felt vast, full of possibilities, yet grounded in the certainty of their love. Whatever storms or journeys lay ahead, they would face them together, their hearts anchored in light, trust, and shared dreams. The final weeks of spring were a gentle blur of shared routines. Arin and Elara would rise with the sun, tending lanterns, gardens, and the boat. Evenings were for walking the cliffs, watching the horizon where sea met sky, and sharing quiet conversation. One afternoon, as they rested on their favourite driftwood log, Arin whispered, "I've travelled far and wide, yet nothing compares to this." Elara leaned her head on his shoulder. "We've built a life from small moments. That's the adventure worth living." He kissed the top of her hair, smiling. "Then let's never stop collecting them." The waves whispered below them, carrying away the old and welcoming the new, while their hearts remained anchored in shared serenity. A gentle summer rain fell one evening, drumming softly on rooftops and lanterns. They stayed indoors, repairing and crafting new lanterns, laughter mingling with the patter of drops. "You've made this place brighter than I ever imagined," Arin said, holding up a freshly decorated lantern. Elara studied it, her fingers tracing the delicate carvings. "And you've made it safe for me to love it." He smiled, brushing her hair from her face. "It's not just a place, it's everything we've chosen together." Outside, the rain glimmered in lantern light, as if the world itself celebrated their quiet, enduring love. One evening, they decided to revisit the hidden cove. The boat rocked gently under the twilight, the water reflecting the pinks and purples of the sky. They laughed as they navigated familiar paths, recalling the first time they'd sailed together. "Do you remember how terrified I was in the storm?" Elara asked, leaning back against him. "I do," Arin said, smiling. "And how we faced it together. I think that night taught me everything about trust and love." She pressed her hand to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Then let's never forget that lesson." The cove glimmered like a hidden jewel, a quiet reminder of the life they had chosen, brave, shared, and luminous. That night, the village held a lantern release to welcome midsummer. Hundreds of lights floated skyward, mingling with stars, carrying wishes, stories, and love. Arin and Elara released theirs together, fingers intertwined. "Do you think we'll ever tire of this?" Elara asked softly. "Not as long as we do it together," Arin replied. The lanterns rose higher, a river of light. For the first time, the village felt endless, the sky full of possibility, and their love fully unbounded, anchored only by choice, care, and devotion. Finally, as midnight settled over the cliffs, they sat in silence, watching the last lanterns drift into the stars. Arin wrapped his arm around Elara, drawing her close. "Home isn't a place," he whispered. "It's the light we carry, the people we love, the moments we choose to keep." Elara rested her head against him. "Then we are home," she said. The sea sighed below, the wind whispered in harmony, and above, the stars watched over them. In that eternal quiet, their hearts were bound forever, a luminous story of love, trust, and shared horizons, a life, fully chosen, fully lived, and fully bright.